Thank you for being here at the Hiawatha Business Summit. The Economic Alliance is proud to do this. We've been doing this with HEDCO for the last 5 years, at least as far as I know, and probably longer than that. Today is a little bittersweet because Kim is leaving us. So I'm so glad that you showed up. We're going to miss you so much. Hiawatha is just an amazing, amazing economic development partner in this space. I'd also like to thank Barbara for our guest speakers today who are from the DOT. And I'm going to read these off since I get the titles all squabbled up when they're official long titles like they are. So hold on. And during this, just remember the floor is a little slippery. Coffee is over there, but you can also go out and get coffee as well. So we have today Stuart Anderson from the Iowa DOT Transportation Development Division Director, Kathleen Cutler from Iowa Department of Transportation, Transportation Planner for District 6, and Sally Stutsman, Iowa Department of Transportation Commissioner. And they're going to discuss with us what's on the horizon for infrastructure. Hiawatha, obviously you guys are seeing what's going on with Tower Terrace, but there's a lot more in store for Iowa, including some really fantastic things with electric vehicles. But I'm going to let them take the show. If anybody needs a flyer, I've got some extra flyers, and we'll have you take it away. Who's going first? Sally.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting us here today. It's always great to get out to people and talk about what's going on with the DOT. I see some familiar faces in the group, so it's just nice to be here. My name is Sally Stutsman. I live 7 miles south of Iowa City, Riverside, Iowa. Nobody knows where Riverside is, but they do know where Iowa City is. So, and I'm fairly new on the commission. I just finished my first year. I was appointed a year ago in July, and so I'm starting my first year. So I'm one of the newer commissioners. I wanted to talk just a little bit about what we do as a commissioner, in case you don't know. The Code of Iowa gives us the authority to be on the Transportation Committee, and that's on Chapter 307A of the Iowa Code. I know you're all going to run right out and look that up, but anyway. There are 7 members on the commission, and there can be no more than 4 from one political party. It's gender and regionally balanced, so they try to get somebody from all parts of the state. Those that are serving on the commission now are Richard Arnold, and he serves as chair, and he's from Russell, Iowa. Charisse Yaney, and she's vice chair, and she's from Sioux City. Kathy Furman is from Des Moines. Ray Gasser, he's the newest member of the commission, and he's from Corning. Linda Junkett is from Winterset. Tom Riley is from Oskaloosa, and then myself. So you can see that it's pretty well gender and regionally balanced. We serve for 4 years, starting the 1st of July, and we're appointed by the governor, and we're confirmed by the Senate. And yes, I did fill out a resume and application. So we must comply with the open meetings laws. And we meet monthly, once a month, the second Tuesday of every month. On one Tuesday of the month, we meet in Ames, and that's just a workshop and then a public meeting after the workshop where we approve issues that we probably talked about either during that workshop or the previous month. And then the other month, we take tours around the state. We just finished a tour last month in Sioux City. Next month, not in September, but in October, we'll visit the Des Moines area. And what we do is that the district offices explain the projects that they have going on in the area, so the commissioners can see what's going on, what we approved, what maybe needs some work or maybe needs some consideration. And the tours, I think, are probably some of the highlights for the commissioners, just to get out and see what's going on with the different district offices and people within the state. After we have a tour, then we have a workshop meeting. We meet usually for the tour on Monday. In the afternoon, we have a workshop. And then the next morning on Tuesday, then we talk about, have a business meeting, and then we have public input meetings. And this is anybody from the public can come and address the commission and tell what their thoughts are, concerns are, what they'd like to have us look at or whatever. And that's usually how our meetings go. Now, the duties of the commissioners are to develop, coordinate, and annually update the comprehensive transportation policy and plan for the state, and promote the coordinated and efficient use of all available modes of transportation for the benefit of the state and its citizens. We also prepare, adopt, and cause to be published the long-range 5-year plan, which I think Stu is going to talk about. And we adopt rules for the department. We identify within the primary road system a network of commercial and industrial highways, and then we approve the rules for the Iowa Department of Transportation before they are adopted by the director. We also do a lot with grant funding. You know, it seems like every time we meet, we are looking at grants to be approved for the state. And I think what's always kind of interesting, people just assume the DOT Commission just looks at roads and highways, but we also look at the state recreational trails. We approve the RISE grants for Revitalize Iowa's Sound Economy. I'm sure many in this room have probably dealt with those grants. Grants for aviation and airports, for public transportation, for the Iowa freight transportation, and for railroads. So it's a pretty broad group of items that we work with. It's just not the roads. The commissioners, it's made very clear, has no broad operational authority over the Iowa Department of Transportation. So you can call me, but I'm not going to do anything about the guy that is leaning on his shovel on the road. You know, that's not what the commissioners are all about. And we are careful to express our personal opinions, but not that of the commission. And that we are there to represent the whole state of Iowa. And even though we, come from a particular area, our role is to make sure that we see that the transportation needs of the whole state are met. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stu.
All right. Thank you, Sally. And again, I'm Stuart Anderson, Director of the Transportation Development Division at the DOT, and I'll talk a little bit more about that division here in a second. But first, I want to expand a little bit about what Sally said about the role of the commission. You know, some might think that the DOT would prefer to be able to just develop the 5-year program on their own and not work through a transportation commission, not have that oversight and that other layer. But that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that the biggest supporters of the system we have in the state of Iowa with the Transportation Commission are those of us that work at the DOT. The legislators way back when that established the system we have in Iowa really made great decisions. Having a Transportation Commission of 7 Iowans that are appointed by the governor, confirmed from the Senate with gender balance and political affiliation balance, has really been a great asset to the state of Iowa, because what it does, and of course we can compare with other states that either don't have a commission or have to work through the legislature to get a 5-year program adopted. And it's very clear that the system we have in Iowa allows us to make decisions very quickly, and it allows us to make decisions that aren't really political decisions. The commission, as Sally said, every commissioner has always taken to heart their role to represent the entire state of Iowa. They don't represent just the area they're from. And so that's really led to great decision making in the state. So we're huge fans of the system we have. We work really well with the commission, and that's been really important to react to things like the infrastructure bill, where we see a lot more money coming into the state, and putting that money to work quickly has been a priority. And I think in Iowa we have a great story to tell about how we've done that. And I'll talk a little bit about that, of course. Organizationally, as the Transportation Development Division, just a little bit about that division. We are a division that is responsible for supporting the long-range transportation planning for all modes of transportation in the state of Iowa. Again, Sally mentioned that DOT, we are very much a multimodal organization. The legislature made sure that back in 1974 when they turned us from a highway commission to a Department of Transportation, so very focused on aviation, public transit, rail, bicycle, pedestrian, waterway, in addition to the highways and bridges in the state. The division not only is responsible for long-range planning, we're responsible for supporting the commission as they develop a 5-year program for all modes of transportation. And then we also are responsible for developing projects from the environmental process, doing the design work, purchasing property, and actually putting out for bid. Once it gets out for bid, that's when other folks at the DOT take over and dealing with the construction and actually getting the projects built and inspected. Kathy will introduce herself here in a little bit to talk more specifically about projects in the area. Kathy is part of our district office here in the Cedar Rapids area and as part of the broader field operations division, which is all the field workers at the DOT, which is by far the largest division at the DOT because, of course, our field folks are responsible for doing maintenance, snow and ice removal on all of the state highways, which are the interstate, U.S. and Iowa routes in the state. A little bit about funding. I think probably most of you are pretty familiar with the funding system for transportation. I'm going to focus on the highway side a bit, but just for those that aren't, there are three primary funding sources in the state. Of course, at the local level, cities and counties have access to their own revenue streams to improve streets and highways and bridges, primarily property tax, local option sales tax, bonding, those measures. The state, of course, provides funding for roads and bridges, and in fact is the largest source of revenue. The state road use tax fund is about $1.7 billion per year of funding that is allocated by the Code of Iowa to the DOT for our state highways. It's also allocated to all 99 counties, and all 945 or so cities get allocations by formula of the state road use tax fund to not only support their operations, but support maintenance and improvement of that system as well. And then at the federal level, state of Iowa gets about $700 million a year from the federal government. That again is allocated for all levels of government. Now, federal funding, and that will be the focus of the discussion here, because we're talking about the infrastructure bill primarily. Federal funding is allocated a little differently. Instead of looking at the individual city and county level, most of the federal funding is allocated through our planning agencies. So we have across Iowa 18 rural planning affiliations. Those are multi-county regions that get together. There's at each level or each organization there is a technical committee made up typically of the county engineers there in the area, some city representatives for smaller cities under 50,000 population, and sometimes some other transportation representatives, like there could be a transportation or a public transit representative. They typically are responsible for reviewing applications for funding that serve the entire regional area. And then ultimately those recommendations go to a policy committee, which are made up of elected officials. So again, some county supervisors in the counties in the area, city officials, mayors on those policy boards. In the metro areas, so every metro area over 50,000 population, we have 9 of those in the state of Iowa, has the same structure through what's called a metropolitan planning organization. Of course, in this area, it's the corridor MPO that serves the Cedar Rapids metro area. So same structure, usually a tech committee and then a policy committee to make funding decisions on how primarily highway funds are allocated. So with federal funding being more focused on needs that are of a federal interest, the idea is that by having these multi-jurisdictional regions and metropolitan areas, they're better able to make funding decisions that serve the entire region or metro area. So that's why federal funds aren't allocated to all 945 cities and all 99 counties, although there's some more exceptions on the county level. So it's more this regional, metropolitan, collaborative area. Of course, part of that also is the development of long-range plans at those regional metro areas as well to help guide those prioritization of funds as you're actually programming them on specific road and bridge projects. So that's been a really important effort. The metropolitan planning process is very much defined in federal law. Where Iowa is a little different is we've mirrored that in those 18 regional planning affiliations. That's much less prescribed in federal law, but we felt like that has served our metro areas really well. So that's why that's been adopted by the commission to do that in our rural areas as well. And we think that's been really successful. So our federal funds are generally allocated to the DOT and then our 18 regional planning areas and 9 metropolitan planning areas, so that they then program those federal funds for those priority projects. Now there are, as I mentioned, there's some exceptions. There is some funding at the federal level dedicated for bridge projects, and that funding, there is a good portion of that is dedicated directly to Iowa's 99, each of Iowa's 99 counties. Of course, as I think we all know, we have a lot of bridges in the state of Iowa. Most of those are on the county system, and most of the bridges in poor condition, the great majority, are on the county system. So that's why it's important that counties get each their own allocation of bridge funding. So that's a little bit about how funding works, primarily, again, on the highway bridge side. So now shifting to the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill, as we all know, passed back in November of last year. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's called lots of different things. That's the full name. IIJA, IJA. I call it the infrastructure bill. You often hear the administration calls it the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. So if you've heard any of those terms or acronyms, that's all talking about that big infrastructure bill passed last November. That bill, of course, was very significant in the amount of funding it dedicated for all sorts of types of infrastructure. Water systems, sewer systems, vertical infrastructure, transportation, just really significant in that sense. From a transportation perspective, while it was still very significant, it was really a relatively routine bill in the federal funding process. The federal funding process always begins with what they call a transportation authorization bill. So that's a bill that Congress passes typically every 5 years, where they say, okay, we've identified this much money exists over the next 5 years, and we're authorizing it to be spent on these activities and in these programs. And that authorization bill is really important because that provides metro areas, rural areas, the state with funding certainty that over the next 5 years that funding is going to be available so we can develop 5-year programs, plan for projects, put them out for bid, and construct them. The next step is there still is required an annual appropriation process to actually make that funding available, which although that typically doesn't pass on time, it's always been done. So we always are, once we get that authorization bill, we have a lot more comfort that we know the funding's going to be there. So the infrastructure bill was our authorization bill for transportation programs. So again, that happens every 5 years. A lot of people talk about the infrastructure bill as kind of this one-time deal that provided funding for transportation, and it really wasn't. It was significant in the breadth of what was covered, but again, for transportation, it really was just a normal authorization bill, but at significantly higher funding levels. On the highway side, it was about a 30% increase in federal funding over the 5-year life of the bill. The public transit side was even higher, about a 35% increase. So that's federal funding that goes to the 35 public transit agencies in the state of Iowa, primarily to support their operations, but also to support capital improvements, bus replacement needs. Significant increases on the aviation side, which Iowa's public airports that are on the federal aid system have very much benefited from. Really significant increases in funding for the waterway system in the state. We're already seeing some committed projects on the Mississippi River that we've been asking for many decades to invest in our lock and dam system, which is really of vital importance to ag users in the state of Iowa. So that was very unique in the infrastructure bill from what we've seen. Talking more specifically then about the highway side. So once the authorization bill passes, we typically in Iowa go through a process where you then have to decide how are these individual funding programs going to be allocated. And the Iowa Code actually gives that authority to the director of the Department of Transportation. However, going back many decades, again, this is a testament to how much we value the commission process we have in Iowa. The DOT directors over, again, going back to the 80s, have deferred that authority to the commission because we felt that that is more transparent to have that go through the commission process, that deliberation of how to allocate these funds. And we also felt it was less political, too, that way to go through the commission to do that. So with the passage of the bill in November, that kicked off a pretty lengthy process. Actually, we really kind of wrapped that up in July of assessing how, what these programs are, because there were some new programs in the infrastructure bill. Assessing which programs grew. Of course, it wasn't uniform across all the programs. Going out and having discussion with local jurisdictions and other stakeholders to get their input, and ultimately making some recommendations to the commission on these programs, and then having them act on that, which, again, they did in July. So, of course, a big part of this was, again, there were new programs, so we, of course, have to wait a bit for the federal government to come out with guidance for those new programs. And that took a little while. In fact, there's, I think, our last new program, we just got guidance here within the last month or so. So it's taken a while to get all that background information just to be smart enough to assess how best to allocate those in the state of Iowa. But so this was an interesting authorization bill, again, because of the large increase in funding and the number of new programs. The last authorization bill we went through just had kind of modest increases and really no new programs, so it was a pretty straightforward process. Just talking about a couple of the new programs, just to give you a sense of why this was an important process this year. Of course, I talked about bridges already in Iowa. We have, by a lot of measures, we're the top in the country and the number of bridges that are in poor condition, again, primarily on the county side. Well, this authorization bill created a brand new bridge program where funding is allocated to states solely based on bridge needs. And so, of course, Iowa ended up getting a pretty good chunk of that money. We're getting about $90 million a year just from this new program. That is in addition to the normal program that is allocated to RPAs and MPOs, our regional and metropolitan planning organizations, more normally the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. So a lot of the discussion working with cities and counties and planning organizations was, how do we mix in that bridge funding with the Surface Transportation Block Grant money? How much comes to the DOT? How much goes to the planning agencies? How much goes to counties, particularly when we're talking about bridge investment? So that's where a lot of the discussion happened over the last 6 months or so. And again, we had great dialogue. I think another trademark of Iowa is that cities, counties, planning agencies, and the DOT have historically worked really well. That's allowed us to get through these processes pretty quickly. November to July may not seem quick, but compared to what other states are going through, it is pretty quick, actually. So we met with stakeholders, took some recommendations to the commission. They were approved in July. So we're now fully into implementing these funding programs as we're developing 5-year programs, identifying specific projects. There's another new program out there called the Carbon Reduction Program. State of Iowa will be getting about $16 to $18 million per year in a program that is, as the name implies, is dedicated to investing in activities that reduce carbon emissions, and that can be in a pretty broad sense. Certainly it's in things like investing money to expand public transit services. Can be used to invest in more trail projects, get people out of their cars and use our trail and sidewalk system more. It can also be used to invest in operations that improve the flow of traffic. So, of course, a lot of areas have really proactive traffic management activities, whether it's signal coordination activities, or putting cameras up so you can detect incidents quicker and clear them quicker. Pretty broad eligibilities, and that's a new program where, again, because a lot of those challenges are in the metro areas, Part of the recommendation was that those funds be, a portion of those funds be directly allocated to each of Iowa's 9 metropolitan areas. And so that was part of that decision-making process. In addition, another piece of that is that the state is required to develop a carbon reduction strategy. And so we'll be working again with our metropolitan planning partners over the next year. It's due November of 23. So that'll be a process we'll be kicking off here shortly to develop a strategy, a more statewide strategy. There's quite a few other new programs. I won't go through all of those in detail. I think the one other program I wanted to chat a little bit about is there is a new National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, NEVI. I love their acronyms in transportation. The NEVI program provides formula funding to each state. State of Iowa will be getting a little over $50 million over this 5-year period of the infrastructure bill, so about $10 million per year. That funding is available to support the installation of fast charging infrastructure. Now, what the federal law requires is that those funds initially be spent on installing fast charging infrastructure along what they call designated alternative fuel corridors for electric vehicles, which in Iowa, that system is basically the interstate system. It's all of our major interstates. So it's Interstate 80, Interstate 29, Interstate 35, and of course more locally, it's Interstate 380. So those funds will go to build out to minimum federal standards, a system of fast charging infrastructure. Those standards are that there is a site that is at least every 50 miles on that system, that at each site there is at least 4 charging plugs that can support 150 kilowatts. And those sites have to be within 1 mile of that designated interstate system. So once that system is fully built out, then states can start spending that money to build out on other corridors in the state. We expect that it'll take 2 to 3 years for us to reach that minimum build out on the interstate system, and then we'll be able to start looking at other corridors. One of the requirements in the infrastructure bill was that that each state develop a deployment plan for these funds. And that deployment plan was due August 1st of this year. And the federal government has until September 30th to review that plan and give us some feedback and ultimately certify that plan. And then we have the ability to actually put those funds to work. In our plan, it's been interesting. Every state's approached this plan a little differently. We were fortunate in Iowa that particularly fortunate at the Iowa DOT because we have some experience with this because we administered the Volkswagen settlement funds that came to the state of Iowa. If you're not familiar with that, each state received some money with that settlement Volkswagen did for their violation of Clean Air Act laws. So each state got some money that had to go towards activities that reduced emissions. The idea being to try to get the benefits that would have been accrued if Volkswagen hadn't violated those laws. So we administered that at the Iowa DOT and utilized the maximum flexibility of those funds to allocate some of that for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we have some experience in doing 3 rounds of Volkswagen funds and getting those funds put to use. So we have a little bit of a leg ahead of a lot of other states in that experience. It's still going to be really challenging. These are federal highway funds that are used to buy charging infrastructure, which is very much a square peg in a round hole. The federal government is actually still in the middle of some rulemaking to define some more specific requirements for how these funds are utilized. The Volkswagen funds were not federal funds. They weren't even state funds, so they're really flexible and easy to use. Federal funds have a lot more oversight, so that'll be a lot more challenging. So it's going to take some time, even after our plan gets certified at the end of September, to develop a program and actually make those funds available. Our goal is probably late winter, we'll be able to do an announcement of the first round of funding being available. The approach we're looking at doing in Iowa is making it available through a grant program where we will seek applications. In our deployment plan, we did not identify specific sites or locations where we expected these funds to be put to use. We just, in our plan, identified here's some existing sites, here's the ones that don't meet the minimum standards, and here's the couple that do. Here you can see where there's larger than 50-mile gaps. So we're providing that information, but then we think that the private sector is best able to identify the best locations, working with their utility partners on where to put those sites. So we'll solicit applications and award funds. Certainly we expect some funds will be used to upgrade existing charging sites to meet those minimum standards, and then funds will also go to brand new sites. We do expect these primarily will be at convenience stores, truck stops, could be, strip malls or maybe movie theaters. Again, the key being they have to be within a mile of the interstate or the highway corridor eventually where this is being spent. A question we get asked a lot is, will these be put up at our rest areas on the interstate? And no, they will not. Actually, there's a federal prohibition on doing any state-supported commercial activities at our rest areas. Again, to make sure we're not having an unfair advantage over the private sector because we have that kind of dedicated right-of-way right on the interstate. So we are not able to install those at our rest areas. So again, really expecting, like has been done with fueling stations for many years, we're expecting this will be private sector will identify the best locations for these. One last program I wanted to talk a little bit about, and then I'll pass it to Kathy to get into some more details about specific projects in the area, is I did want to talk about trails. Probably our the program that had the biggest growth in the infrastructure bill for transportation is funding that can be used for trail development. Now, actually, these programs took a huge cut, 10 years or so ago. So it's not quite fair to talk about it seeing such record growth this year, because really it brought it back to where it was probably a decade or so ago. But there is significantly more funding for trails through a program called the Transportation Alternatives Program. And so this is funding that prior to this large increase primarily was allocated directly to those 18 regional planning affiliations and 9 metropolitan planning organizations, so they can put those to projects. It's more than trails, but primarily it's used for trail projects. But with this large increase, we are recreating a statewide program that we used to have, where there will now be $5 million available through the DOT awarded by the Commission for these larger trail projects that require more investment to complete a phase or build that last connection. When you divide money up amongst 18 RPAs, 9 MPOs, it does dilute the amount of money you can put to a big trail project. So we're excited to have this statewide fund available to really kickstart some investment in trail projects. We've had a lot of progress over the last 20 years in building trail connections in the state, and I know the Cedar Rapids metro area has done great things in that with that focused area. But there's more to do and more we can do, so we're excited to have that. Another piece of that program at the state level is that funding can also be used for dedicated Safe Routes to School projects. We used to have that. That went away when we saw kind of that cut in funding. Now it's back where you can apply at the statewide level for projects that make it easier and safer for kids at an elementary, junior high level to get from their home to their school. So sidewalks, trails, crossing safety improvements. And also some scenic byway funding available through that statewide program. We're able to do that even while significantly increasing the dedicated allocation to the regional metropolitan areas. So that's a really important positive of the infrastructure bill. My segue into Kathy is, of course, as we implemented the infrastructure bill, our final product to really put this money to use is the development of the 5-year construction program, where the Commission reviews all the state and federal funding they are forecast to get over the next 5 years and identify specific bridge and highway projects that those funds will go towards. So that's a process that we begin, actually, in September, we'll have our first discussion with the commission at their workshop, getting ready for the next program that they approve in June. So this past June, they approved the first 5-year program that fully implemented the infrastructure bill from the state DOT perspective. And so that program went from a $3.6 billion program before the infrastructure bill to a $4.2 billion program. So a significant increase in funding that allowed the commission to put funding to work in a lot of new projects. Of course, a big challenge they had and are going to have, particularly with this next program, is dealing with the rising construction costs. Of course, we see that in everything in the economy right now, but certainly the transportation sector has seen that with the price of asphalt really being impacted by oil prices, all construction materials. So actually about 40% of the infrastructure bill increase just went to cover those forecast cost increases in the 5-year program. So, you know, it is great we got the infrastructure bill. It helped us. We would have certainly been having to have tough discussions with the commission about delaying projects. But we're sure hoping for some relief in that so we can just focus on new work. This next program, there's no new funding bills. So the commission's going to be a little bit more challenged with this next program to develop and approve that program. But a lot of exciting things in this last program, particularly in the Cedar Rapids area. So with that, Kathy?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm the planner for the transportation areas, Cedar Rapids and the Iowa City, so really great growth areas. We went ahead and printed off what I'm going to talk about today, which are programs, projects that we're working on in the area. This year, we're going to see the opening of Tower Terrace, one of the really great projects, Tower Terrace and 380, a new interchange type up there. Yeah, very grateful, one of the jewels in Kim's crown. So that's been wonderful. Right. We'll have to talk about a ribbon cutting. We haven't done that yet, so yeah. 2023, we have our normal resurfacing on First Avenue. We would love to give that over to the city. I see Brenna's here. So I'll make my annual pitch for that, but we will be doing some maintenance on there. 2024 sees us heavy again on I-380 with the Wright Brothers Boulevard. Again, we're going to rebuild that interchange and modernize it. Also with that will be an expansion of I-380 to 6 lanes, plus some auxiliary lanes. This will be from basically the Swisher-Shoeyville area up to, but just short of, the Highway 30 interchange. Highway 30 and 380 is kind of its own animal, and we'll be coming back to that at a later date. Adjacent to that, 380 widening in Johnson County. That'll be 6 laning from north of Forever Green Road up to the Swan Lake overpass. And then we'll come back and do the Penn Street interchange. Again, just tremendous growth in that 380 area. So the time has really, really come to get that widened. 2025 sees us back up here in Hiawatha working on a new interchange at Boyson Road and I-380. That will go out for bids in the summer of 2024. That'll be a multi-year project with some closures of the on and off ramps, as well as Boyson Road over the interchange. Have been working great with the city of Hiawatha, as well as the new ER there for Mercy Hospital. They, of course, are concerned about patients and getting patients in and out, and also if they need to transfer them. So we're trying to minimize those closures as much as we can. Both Boyson and Wright Brothers and Tower Terrace are new types of interchange sort of in Iowa called diverging diamonds. I put just a generic picture of one down below. Traffic actually crosses in the middle and then has free flow left turns. Really great type of interchange to handle those left turns. So we're very pleased to see that coming. Also in 2025, we have a bridge deck overlay over Center Point Road on Highway 100. So those are basically the highlights of the highway program in the area. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
I think we'd open it up to any questions.
For anybody, right?
Oh, so many questions. So one that's really small first is when you were talking about the Volkswagen dollars you didn't mention like city facilities, like city parks, look for location, whether that's libraries, those types of things. Because I know that's something that is useful and it's a safe place.
Yeah.
is location.
Yeah, so the key there is it would be eligible. The key, though, is a mile from the interstate. So, I think the idea for these funds, again, most of you probably understand this. For electric vehicle charging, it's very different than fueling your vehicle in the sense of 80 to 90% of all electric vehicle charging happens at home at night. Really, the charging demand at these locations will primarily be more for people taking longer trips or going across the state. So that's why they wanted a mile from the interstate, so that it's good proximity. I think the intent is places that are easy to access, have good amenities, restroom facilities that are accessible, 24/7 access, some shelter facilities, maybe even some food and beverage accessibility. So it really is broadly eligible, but where the reason I kind of highlight the convenience stores and truck stops is because primarily I think that's what we have seen historically, and we expect to see this going just to meet that convenience, amenity, and again, within a mile of the interstate. But it could be other areas. With Volkswagen, this federal money can only be spent on this DC fast charging infrastructure. So it's intended to get people a quicker charge than they get otherwise. With the Volkswagen funds, we did both a fast charging component and what's called a level 2 charging component. And there we did a lot more city parking garages, put in that level 2 where people are parking throughout the day and get a little slower charge, but they're there a longer time. So we had a little bit more flexibility with the Volkswagen funds to do that. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned all the projects over the next 5 years. So what's the total dollar combined with those projects? Do you have an estimate?
It's a lot. I didn't add them up, but we're very, very grateful that we get a lot of funding over here. Our district area has had like about 30 to 40% of the dollars in this area. I don't know if that's going to continue because we're finishing up like the 8380 interchange. But, each one of those interchanges is on the order of $25 to $40 million. And then we have the widening on I-380 as well. So we're getting a lot of money over here.
I'll make a comment and a question. The comment is I went down to the Iowa game on Saturday, and I missed that turn.
Uh-oh.
Right, 'cause I was thinking that was in Des Moines.
Right?
And my kid yelling at me, it says that, but I was
Right?
dude, I love those designs, but you need some pretty good signs.
Now that is a little different design. That's a turbine interchange, so it's got those directional ramps. So did you go through Tiffin then?
I ended up going down to Melrose.
Melrose. Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you found your way.
So very appreciative of all these projects, they're great projects, but we also need funding to get forward in Marion on our territory.
Absolutely.
We're well aware of that.
Yep.
I think it's a great project from all aspects in terms of traffic flow, safety, pollution, economic development, so on and so forth. So any Paul could answer possibly, any thoughts on how that can get pushed forward?
I know the city has applied for grants. Do you want to talk, Kim?
Well, yeah, so I'm just going to piggyback on John's question.
Okay.
That was going to be my second question, which I know is going to be a little more difficult. But I think some of the things that we need to, yes, we have applied, obviously the interchange is opening up, we're really excited about that. But then taking it all the way to Highway 13. So in the interim of all of this, Metro, I mean, this is a Metro project. We are doing this as a team effort, which includes the city of Robbins County and then our 3 Metro communities as well. So with that, we've applied for RAISE, which we 3 years of that. This last year, what they were looking for is a little different than what they were looking for 2 years before. So you're always it's always a little up in the air first from Democrats or Republican presidents. So what they're looking for is a little different this last time, which really focuses on low to moderate incomes, those types of things, which maybe Tower Terrace isn't really that area for L&I. So how do we bridge is the key word here. What type, with all the infrastructure dollars that you're talking about, so the cities of Erie and Cedar Rapids continue to work on different sections of Tower Terrace. And it's described in our group that we have ribs, but we don't have the spine to make those connections, so give you a visual of what that really looks like today. So with that then, how do we, while we're waiting for raise, because that's not ever a sure thing, I'm certainly not gonna bet my life on it, but am excited about what that opportunity is. This is a really good project. As John said, economic development, safety, all of those, when you think about the return of the dollar that the federal government would spend on helping us build out this infrastructure. But in the interim, what do we do? Because we can't, in my perspective, and I think I share this for everybody, is we can't just wait for the federal government to give us a hand up, right? So in the interim, with all the different infrastructure dollars that are out there, what are the best grant opportunities for us to complete that spine? And more specifically, it certainly does come down to bridges. And new bridge dollars would be great.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a tough question. I guess first of all, again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, that corridor is not a DOT state highway, so it's not a question of having it programmed by the commission in our 5-year program. Having said that, that's the kind of project, which is why MPOs exist, where you have a project that crosses multiple jurisdictions and has a broader metropolitan priority. And so, it was good that there was an increase in formula funding. Having said that, the MPO has a lot of needs. So that doesn't mean it's easy then to fund a project like that, particularly when a lot of jurisdictions and areas are just trying to keep up what they have now for existing. But the MPO process is certainly a really important piece of that Tower Terrace. Of course, as Tower Terrace has already benefited significantly from congressionally directed funding, the new term for earmarks, did really, really well with that. And, I think we're expecting that every appropriation bill for the foreseeable future is going to have more opportunities through our congressional representatives for that funding. Outside of, the infrastructure bill, as it provides flexibility to the state, is really all formula funds that are allocated. So that really leaves, from a federal perspective, the opportunity for discretionary programs. And certainly, again, there's been attempts already at the RAISE program, which used to be called BUILD, which used to be called TIGER. That still is a great opportunity. Again, there's huge demand for that funding. But I think that Tower Terrace corridor has a lot going for it, and the things that are really important, like project readiness, kind of that multiple jurisdictional collaboration. You're right, each administration puts a little bit of a different twist in how they prioritize projects. But we did have some successful jurisdictions in Iowa in the last round of RAISE grants. We probably aren't the ones to come to for advice, because we have not had good success at the DOT for grant programs, particularly the RAISE side. And I think there's going to be some discussion here about the one program we do have of state funding that Commissioner Stutsman mentioned is our RISE program. That is a grant program to support city and county road projects that support economic development. It's very specific types of economic development, but we have done a little bit more corridor work. It's certainly not a big solution, but it can be part of the piece to that puzzle.
I should say thank you on behalf of all of us for seeing, as the commissioners, as people that are working in the background, thank you for all the work that you've done to help us get Tower Terrace Interchange open and off the ground, because without your support, we wouldn't be here today. So thank you so much. Stu also mentioned the earmarks, the SPF dollars, which what he was referring to is some dollars that $5 really exciting, right? Whoever has heard of that. So very grateful for that, but that is $5 million that we will be able, all of our communities will be able to utilize for acquisitions and continuing to design the roadway all the way out to Highway 15. So we're very grateful for that because that is additional dollars that really helps us have a shovel-ready, truly shovel-ready project. And we continue to work together to make sure that that stays focused and stays on its place. So thank you for that.
We have a couple more minutes left. If anybody has another question, you're welcome to stay for a little while. You have to feed us back their space eventually. But does anybody have any more questions?
Actually, two, stepping slightly outside the metro area. First, Highway 30, about across Benton County now. Once that's open and completed, which is soon to be next year possibly, will what will become the westbound side be rebuilt or resurfaced?
I believe so. I was looking at Kathy. I think the intention is, actually, I think we're kind of tearing it all up and redoing it. So we probably have a couple more years because we'll come back and do that work. But yeah, I think that is a full reconstruction.
And then, are there any, I guess this is a two-part question, any plans going east on 30?
Yeah, so there are plans, but they're not 4-lane plans. So this is probably one of the items the commission hears more about than any other corridor in the state, and we certainly do at the DOT as well. Is our plans going east of Lisbon? And so right now, the traffic drops off significantly at that point. And in addition, the corridor goes through, I don't know, 6, 7 pretty small communities that are pretty constrained with a railroad and, kind of the main street of the town. And so, really with the perspective in our long-range plan and in our programming so far is that what's needed on that corridor is a higher level 2-lane that can, eliminate some of the challenges with, for example, farm traffic on that corridor by providing regular passing lanes on those rural sections. So the commission has programmed 2 phases beginning at Lisbon and going to the east of Super 2. Again, we hear a lot. The Highway 30 Coalition is a really active commission or coalition that comes to every commission public input meeting, and they're still pushing really hard for 4-lane. But right now the plans are to look at more of a Super 2 facility or a high-level 2-lane facility for 30 between Lisbon and, ultimately on to DeWitt, but yeah, initially to Clarence. Yeah, actually, that's on our. I would say it's part of. I mentioned we're talking about our next 5-year program, which also involves talking about our next round of planning studies, and that corridor is definitely on our radar of needing some more planning work to decide when it needs to be done. Yeah, originally that was one of our top corridors for a Super 2, but back then our idea of a Super 2 was a really designed for really high speed, so it was going to be doing a lot of grading work, and it ended up becoming almost the cost of building a 4-lane. So we kind of revisited that and took a step back because that wasn't the intent of doing a Super 2 project. So now that we're doing a lot more Super 2 work where we've scaled back what our expectations are on that. But yeah, that's definitely a corridor that we're looking at. Yeah, yep. So ultimately, I-80, certainly between Iowa City and the river, will be a 6-lane facility. The question is how quickly can we get that done? Right now, we're starting kind of our work from the Iowa City area. Obviously, you see a lot of work going on to the West Branch area. So we're finishing up some study work in the Quad Cities to figure out. Of course, we have a lot more mixed master systems interchanges we need to figure out how to deal with. So it will be 6-lane. It's just a question of timing and how long that takes. Of course, our next priority really is replacing that Mississippi River Bridge in the Quad Cities. So that's another joint project with Illinois. That's in our 5-year program. But yes, that's probably the priority on 80.
Kathy, can you talk a little bit timeline for 6-laning 380 going north?
Sure. So in 2024, that's when we're going to start with Wright Brothers, and then the 6-laning there from Swisher-Shoeyville up to just short of Highway 30. And then the following year, we're going to jump back down. So that's multi-year projects, so they'll be under construction at the same time. Then we're going to jump back down to the North Liberty area. So right now with 380, it's 6 lanes about a mile north of the new Forever Green Road interchange, plus auxiliary lanes. So we'll start at that point and then go through the Penn interchange to about a mile north, which is Swan Lake Overpass. So that'll be 2025, 26, maybe 27. Penn interchange will start somewhere in there. And then the third project, which is not yet programmed, is what we call the Central Project. That'll go over the Coralville Reservoir, the Iowa River, and include that Swisher-Shoeyville interchange. So we expect that to be programmed when it can be. That really we don't have on our radar right now. As part of Tower Terrace, we had said we would do the 6-laning, but it's not yet programmed, I don't believe.
We'd like to thank Stu, Sally, and Kathy for making the drive, no pun intended there. Over here and everything that you do for economic development. Kim, everything you've done for City of Hiawatha and for Cutler. Can't thank you enough. You've been a fantastic partner. We're sad to see you go, but you're here in the area, so we're still gonna clean up. And everybody have a great day. Thank you for showing up, and watch for information on the next Hiawatha Business Summit that's coming out. We're gonna have Debbie Durham here from IEDA, which is always interesting.